Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critical Political Thinking. My name is Corey Camasso, and I'm the host. Today we're going to be talking and going into more depth about the hypocrisy of the left. Not only are we going to be talking about Joe Biden and his response to COVID and the way the liberal media has portrayed this, but we'll also be talking about the BLM and Antifa protests and riots and their results, comparing to the Capitol protests. And we will get into depth and show the hypocrisy on the left as well as the liberal media revolving around that. And then we'll get into the topic on everyone's mind, and that is the second impeachment trial for former President Donald Trump. We'll go over the details revolving around that impeachment trial and whether or not it holds any ground. So, welcome to another episode of Critical Political Thinking. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critical Political Thinking. My name's Corey Camasso, and we're going to jump right into it because we've got a ton of information to share with you today. First, we're going to start with the response to COVID from the Biden administration, and we're going to contrast that to what the Trump administration had initiated and, I guess you can say, enacted while in office. So, first, let's talk about how the media has responded. First of all, they blame Trump for the virus that obviously came from China. They held back the origin of the virus. They refused to say with any confirmation. Fauci he never said it came from China. Magically, as soon as Biden comes into office, Fauci resumes his position. And keep in mind, we know why Donald Trump removed him, because Donald Trump found out about all of the patents that he had and the fact that he personally profits from the humanization of the COVID virus and the vaccines that follow. Granted, he's a smart individual. He did the research, but as someone now in charge, that is a huge conflict of interest, and that is something that does need to be addressed and now will not be addressed for the simple fact of the administration and their goals. So, what do we have in the first week? Well, already, magically, the COVID numbers are down. Did we not predict that, by the way? That nothing has changed. Absolutely damn nothing. But they're going to say it's all because of the mask mandate that Biden put in place. First of all, the mask mandate is only for federal grounds. That does absolutely nothing for the public. Keep in mind, everyone already was wearing a mask. Most people were being respectful of the policy in place. Most states had their own policy in effect. Just because he went and shouted from a rooftop some BS that was already in place doesn't mean that his response is now some kind of medal awarding result. It's garbage. I mean, it's not garbage. It's just a continuation of the Trump administration. So, I mean, the mask mandate is nothing but what was already in place. And yet the media is now hailing him as some kind of COVID hero. Now, let's also take into account the fact that they're ramping up production of the virus vaccine. That always happens. When anything is put into place, it takes a little while for them to get the logistics in place to mass produce these items. This was the timeline all along. So the extra doses that are coming out Monday by executive order, mind you, executive orders, as we discussed in the last episode, mean absolutely nothing. They are a piece of paper that still needs to have some form of legislation around it. Now, ramping up this production isn't a Biden thing. It was a Trump thing. Under Trump administration, all these vaccines came into fruition. Under Trump administration, everything was put into place. And now all of a sudden, just because Joe Biden takes office a week ago, he's the hero? Really? You didn't see this coming? You don't see the hypocrisy in that? I just don't get it. And now Fauci's definitely claiming it came from a Wuhan lab, or it more than likely could have come from a Wuhan fish market. Now, why won't they say the laboratory where we know that it came from based on the financial data that we've tracked all the way back to the Obama administration and the money that was put into that laboratory and the fact that that laboratory, in fact, worked on the exact virus that we're now dealing with. And you mean to tell me that somehow it just jumped from that place to magically it just popped out in that same exact city that that laboratory is? What in the hell kind of coincidence would that have to be? Are you serious? Like you're honestly saying, no, it had to come from the fish market. It had to have been natural. Just because that laboratory is in the exact same town about 3 blocks over, that's just a coincidence. The liberals will have you believe that that's a coincidence. But if you believe that's a coincidence and you don't think the election was a coincidence, get a clue. Let's keep on going. Let's get into the Capitol, because the Capitol is going to be one of our major topics. Between the Capitol and the impeachment, those are going to be the remaining 2 topics that we discuss with you today, and we're going to make sure that you understand what's really going on in our country, despite the way the liberal media is portraying it. So let's talk about how the individuals will be charged and why they're utilizing such massive charges. Well, they have to use massive charges in order to force through the impeachment. They are utilizing these massive charges in an effort to get the, I guess you can say the assailants and the defendants to admit that the only reason they were there is because they were incited by Donald Trump. In doing so, you'll magically see their charges of sedition and seditious conspiracy drop down. Now keep in mind, they're trying to charge these people with sedition and seditious conspiracy. Now, sedition is basically inciting violence against our government. That's funny. Hasn't that been going on since June with the BLM? Pretty sure it has. I'm almost positive it has, and we'll get into where and when in just a few moments. But first, let's also get into what seditious conspiracy is. And this is such a broad charge that they are going to be able to umbrella people under this. But the hypocrisy to umbrella people under this and not to umbrella them through the Black Lives Matter and Antifa would be sheer racism. And if they do in fact do this, they are opening a can I don't think that they will be able to close. So let's get into, I guess, how can we say this? So if you get charged with seditious conspiracy, you're basically conspiring to overthrow your government or to oppose or seize government property. Sounds familiar. Not only in the Capitol, but technically we didn't really seize control of the Capitol. We wandered through the Capitol after the police opened it. Not we, me, I'm saying the conservatives in general. After the officers opened the doors in some cases, and we saw the assaults, we saw the violence, we saw all that. That was awful. But in most cases, they were doors that people didn't end up getting into. Did you know that? Most of those doors, entry was never accessed. And the doors that did access were the ones that were less guarded or the broken windows. That's how most people actually ended up getting in, other than the doors that were open wide and people were able to make their way in, like you saw in the rotunda where you just saw a massive group. They weren't running through the Capitol like they just broke in. They were walking in like it was a tour. So, yes, people did cause violence, and yes, people were aggressive in entering a place that they had no business entering. We were press. We were on the premise, and we refused to enter that building because that is desecration of a monument. And I agree, those people need to be charged. But sedition? Trying to overthrow the government? We want the government. That's the whole point of the reason that everyone was there. For the government to finally sit back and listen. The exact same requests that BLM and Antifa wanted. Just to be heard. To stop ignoring quote-unquote evidence. And let's get into that. So you say that it's sedition, and sedition is basically the seizing or the damage and destruction of federal property, correct? Well, let's get into that. Let's talk about what happened under BLM in the past few months. The Foley Federal Building, okay, that's in Las Vegas. The Foley Federal Building, where 5 individuals were arrested, and they were charged with a misdemeanor of defacing. That's right, a misdemeanor of defacing. That is what they were charged with. Now let's get into the Portland Federal Courthouse. You know, Portland, God forbid. Portland has been one of the most destructive cities in the past 7 months, 8 months anywhere in the country, and yet no one is talking about sedition. No one's talking about seditious conspiracy. But the federal building, the Portland Federal Courthouse, was destroyed. 18 arrests, and they were all minimal arrests. No, I mean, they're federal charges, but they're misdemeanors. Misdemeanors. Very few were charged with violence, and the ones that were charged with violence were bailed out immediately by entertainment and liberal left-wing groups. And they were provided free attorneys through all of these grants that were been provided through all of these wonderful liberal groups. But now, on the left, or on the right rather, they're being treated as criminal terrorists. And most attorneys are even afraid to take the case simply in fear of retaliation. Let's keep going. We got more. How about the Los Angeles Federal Courthouse? We're going to cross this whole country. Los Angeles Federal Courthouse, destroyed. 2 of them, actually, were entered, destroyed, seized, the whole 9. No arrests. I could find nothing. How about the federal building in Manhattan, 26 Federal Plaza? Yeah, that was also destroyed. You know, it's disgusting, okay? 75,000 threats were made to cops, federal buildings, you know, etc., on social media platforms, individuals, so on and so forth. You don't see that on the media, though, do you? 75,000 compared to the quote-unquote around 308 over the last 3-month arrests regarding and revolving around the electoral fraud protests. Now, you know, they keep claiming that the hypocrisy's on the other side. You know, the police failed to show up. They didn't give a shit. They didn't care. They didn't care about protecting the Capitol. They didn't think that the right was going to do anything. They let them do it. You know, this is what the left is saying right now. They're blaming the police for failing to contain the area. And we should be blaming the police, but not necessarily the individuals that were there, but the higher-ups. Because, you know, we need to start asking the questions. Who knew what was going to happen? Who knew the volume of people that were going to be there and took no additional action like they did during the BLM protests? And you might see that as racist, but flip the table. What about all the innocent people there that were unprotected? What about all the innocent people that came to peacefully protest and the police were just gone? There was no security, no safety for any of those people. That's the real problem, and everyone's overlooking it. See, you're failing to realize they did that so we would be hurt, so we would break into the building, so problems would arise and no one would give a shit. And now they're saying it's only because they're racist. No, it has nothing to do with racist. It has to do with the fact that they set all of this up. And if you don't see it, I don't know how else to explain. If they can put all of those people there to keep the BLM protests safe and secure and keep the Capitol safe and secure at that point, there's absolutely no excuse why they didn't do it to keep our protesters safe and secure. If anything, that should be the shortcoming they're discussing. The fact that they failed to protect all of the people trying to protest and do their First Amendment rights. And because of the fact that they failed to provide that adequate level of security, things got overrun and a mob mentality was allowed to take place. That mob mentality never would have happened had they had adequate security. Things would have remained under control. But because of the Capitol Police's failure to care enough about the conservative protests and their rights and their protection, this is what happened. But nobody's reporting the truth. They're lying and making it out to be some kind of racist bullshit when it's really political. Get a clue. Pay attention. It's media hypocrisy at its greatest. I mean, let's talk about the media hypocrisy. I know we talked and briefly touched about it last time, but let's talk about the differences between these two as we speak. So, they are claiming that the right approves of the Capitol riot by not going to impeach Donald Trump. They're claiming that this is another statement that the conservatives are just crazy. How? Please explain that to me. Explain to me how, because an individual wanted to inform his followers to practice their First Amendment rights, never inciting violence. The violence, as I just mentioned, came because of a failure of the Capitol Police to contain and a mob mentality, a proven psychological anomaly can be proven. So let's move on to that. Let's get past that for a moment. Let's talk about the contrast between the BLM, Antifa riots over the past 8 months and the past 3 months for the election fraud protests and quote-unquote riots. Now, keep in mind, you're going to say, well, that's only 3 months when they had 8 months. That's why the higher numbers. But if you take the first 3 months, which is always the beginning, is always the highest momentum, the numbers aren't even close. And let's get through the factual numbers so you can't even argue with it. So let's talk about time. So you have 8 months, like I said, and 3 months. It went from May 26th of 2020, when Mr. Floyd was killed, till now. And then we're going to take November 4th till now. This is our timeline, so you're aware of the situation. Let's go with injured cops first. For the Capitol rioters, there were 58 injured police. 58 injured police over the past 3 months total. 58, okay, that were reported. For BLM, 2,300 plus. 2,300 plus. And you're going to tell me that the violence is even comparable? That domestic terrorist group, that's a domestic terrorism group. One is a single solitary event that really caused the majority of the numbers we're about to discuss. The other is over 8 months, a whole culture in a sense. It's continuous. And while the majority of both sides are peaceful, it just so happens that the other side, their group is much larger and much more violent and much more destructive and on a more continuous basis. And they both have claims. They both have reasons for doing things, and we'll get to that at the end. But let's talk about next the death to cops over the last few months. So over 8 months for BLM, we're looking at around 19 deceased officers around or involving BLM or executions based on BLM, where they walk up to a window and execute someone. Oh, that's just a single event. So was the Capitol event. That's a one-time thing. They're not continuously doing that. And as much as you'd like to claim they are by pushing these sedition charges, by saying it's a pattern, it's the planned event, not one damn person that walked into that building, other than maybe Jake Angeli, because he is an actor, and he is somebody that really needs to be looked into, because guaranteed, mark my words, you will see more of Jake in the impeachment trial. He is the person they had put in there for one reason and one reason only, to get that incitement charge to stick, to say that he was incited by Donald Trump. Mark my words. You're going to see it. I promise you. It's an open book. You can read the Democrats like an open book if you're smart enough. If not, we'll explain it to you. Now, let's talk about, deaths to cops, I'm sorry. So we had the BLM. Now let's talk about Capitol rioters. 1 and 1. One was suicide, one actually died, and it wasn't even an execution, it was an assault with a fire extinguisher. Disgusting, despicable. I'm not by any way saying it's okay, but it isn't an execution. Let's move into property damage. So BLM at the Capitol, around 2.7 million in property damage. Didn't seem like it, but 2.7 million, maybe because it's expensive marble. Who knows? 2.7 million, fine. $2.7 million for a single day. And, it was I think it was 2.4 for a single day, and then 300,000 over the last 3 months in property damage has been claimed through insurance properties. That's it. BLM, 2.5 to $3 billion. How is that not domestic terrorism? That's more than the cost of the September 11th attacks. 2.5 to $3 billion. Get that number through your head. How many people would that help? How many people would that feed? How many families would that provide reparations to? Get a clue, people. Get a clue. There's the hypocrisy of the left, to them to say that one is justice, one is social justice, one is so purposeful and constitutionally accepted. No, it's not. It's criminal activity. And then you talk about the other side as if they are treasonous, seditious criminals, when in fact it was a one-day event. And yes, these people need to be punished for any of the activity that they did, but at the same time, they are nowhere near, and nowhere near the movement is nowhere near the volume and level of destruction and mayhem of BLM and Antifa. And I'm not saying that BLM isn't a worthwhile cause. I'm not saying that the majority of BLM isn't good, What I'm saying is that the part that isn't so far outweighs the Capitol rioters, and yet that's not the way the liberal media is portraying it. That's the point we're trying to make. Now let's get into arrests. BLM, 14,000 arrests. 14,000! That means 14,000 people did something wrong across the country in the past 8 months. And yet for Capitol rioters, 310. Do the math. 310. I don't think that happened in the first hour on the first few weeks. So just get that through. Now, you ask, well, why are they doing this? Well, because they say that cops are killing unarmed African Americans, or killing African Americans at a ridiculous rate. Well, ask yourself, how many individuals were killed by police officers since 2017? African Americans, 893. 893. Now, some of those were justified, some of those had weapons, but a total of 893. I think they said somewhere around 15 were non-armed. Now, I don't know if that was 1 year or the full 3, but either way, the total, 893. White, 1,658. Double. Now, take into account, African Americans commit crimes at a higher clip. Caucasians don't. And yet, Caucasians are killed twice as much as African Americans. The math doesn't add up. So for you to justify that, you should be going for all colors, that police kill all people, not just African Americans, if it was a valid case. But since it's not valid and it's not statistically proven, all it is nothing but a liberal media agenda, an attempt to force Donald Trump out by utilizing racism, exactly what they did. And now, another impeachment sham. We saw it coming, as I mentioned with Jake. Now let's talk about it. So we have an impeachment, another impeachment of Donald Trump for inciting violence. We heard his speech. He didn't say a single word about violence. And now all they're going to try and do is draw a bridge between a clown like Jake Angeli stating that he was incited by Donald Trump. Well, what if a monkey told me to do it? What if a gorilla? What if a fucking rhinoceros told me to do it? What if? Does that mean that we can or have him arrested? No. It's called each person is responsible for their own actions. And yes, if he said, go and do this, yes, do this for me, then that's a whole different ballgame. But just because someone misinterpreted what he clearly stated does not give the right to anyone to pull another sham of an impeachment. And that scares me, because that just means anytime that the liberal left disagrees with any candidate in the future on the right or the middle or anywhere but themselves, they will just say they're impeached because they have the numbers in the House to do so. And now Senate's tied, all because of this electoral system. So now what? So now we have a Senate. At least the Senate has enough brains to know better this time around. And last time it was a little too close for comfort. But this time, don't worry, he's not going to be impeached. And we'll get at the end, we'll explain why that's such a fantastic thing. But first, let's get into it. Let's talk about Schumer and what he thinks. Schumer claims that they do have the power to impeach someone even after they're out, based on an 1876 case where Mr. Belknaps ran across the courtyard to go and resign before they could impeach him. And that's the precedent he's attempting to use. Well, guess what? Donald Trump didn't run across the ground to resign. That wasn't how it worked. Instead, what happened was his term legally ran out. Was it unfortunate that it was the end of his term for their timing? Absolutely. But there is a statute of limitations on certain things, and this is not, if that's the precedent they're attempting to lay that on, that doesn't hold any grounds. Sorry, Chuck, if that's the best you have, you failed. On top of that, it's all over a resignation. No one resigned this time around, so you cannot base it on that. You just can't. And on top of that, the entire case has no basis. There is absolutely no way, other than to get people to make that assumption and that tie for you, and I wouldn't lend no credibility to any of these individuals. They're criminals. They've incited violence. I don't trust them, and I certainly wouldn't allow them to weigh in on the impeachment of a president of the United States, a former president of the United States that did a fantastic job, mind you. A job so well that he has literally scared the living shit out of the left that they have to go and do all of this with the understanding and knowing that we see right through it for the most part, but they're willing to take that risk because they're thinking that most Americans are so stupid that they'll just follow along with Rachel Maddow and Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon when they're the ones saying, oh, who says protests have to be peaceful? But now all of a sudden, they must be peaceful. You are inciting violence. You are a rioter. You are a seditious individual. You're pretty funny. You're an entertainment individual. You're not a journalist. You're a joke. It's sad what the media has turned out to be. It really is. The case on itself is baseless. It's meritless, and it won't go through. Mitch McConnell came right out. If anything, he tricked them in a sense to say, well, let's just wait till afterwards. And now he's going, well, it's after, sorry, you can't impeach him. So if anything, pat on your back, Mitch. Finally, you did something right. Outside of that, we have 44 senators that will not vote for impeachment. They're already stating that they're not going to do it. They don't agree with it, and they don't think there was enough grounds. Maybe they don't like Donald Trump. Maybe they don't agree with what happened, but they clearly understand the law, and they understand the overstepping and the overreach of the liberal left, and they're not going to stand for it. Thank God we still have enough senators in the Congress to make this a possibility. Because otherwise, and what's going to happen in the future, as soon as they make Puerto Rico a state, as soon as they make these other places states and we really lose the majority, it's over. And that is why we need to get this electoral system back into check. And that is exactly what they were trying to do all along. And that is why the Capitol protesters had a valid cause. They want to be able to trust the electoral system. They want to be able to trust the government. They don't want to defund anybody. They don't want to cut off the police. They don't want to just do stuff so they can get away with everything, because that's exactly what BLM wants. They want money for nothing. They want the police gone so they can do whatever the hell they want. How is that America? How are those even valid demands? I understand racial equality. Hell yeah. I don't judge people by the color of their skin. I judge them by their character and their culture and who they are. And anyone that fails to do that, they're not that smart, because you're missing out on a lot of great opportunities and a lot of great people and a lot of great personalities simply for being shallow. Now, so don't worry. Donald Trump will not be impeached. There's enough people that are just, obviously it has to go to a hearing because it's a law, but he will be the first president impeached twice, not removed from office, because both were shams. And hopefully it comes to light that both were, in fact, shams at the end of the day. But let's talk really quick, before we let you go, about why it's great. Donald Trump's already talking about getting back into the political arena. Now, while he may not even run for president, he's going to create, or is attempting to create, a new political party. And it's important to note, there is a Patriot MAGA Party that has formed in Florida. It's not Donald Trump. It's not associated with Donald Trump. So don't get that misconception and all of a sudden call up and join. That's what they're hoping for, and that's not what that is. If anything, it's a liberal joke to try and split off voters from the conservative side. It's kind of bad, in a sense, if Donald Trump were to form his own political party, in a sense that it may shave off Republican voters in a clip that will never benefit anyone. But now, with the Democrats going as far left as they have, and the socialist agenda, there's a majority of Democrats that no longer want to be Democrats. And I think after these next 4 years, that walk away campaign is going to grow so substantially that I really think that there's going to be a need for a middle party. And while I don't think the independent party is going to be it, I feel that the momentum that Donald Trump built is enough to somehow garner and build this new party. Whatever it may be called, MAGA Party by itself, we don't know. But I do know that Donald Trump is working on that. He's working on a media group. He's working on a social media platform. So it's not over by a long shot. The impeachment is a sham again, and it will be thrown out. Pay attention to what's going on with the Capitol, because there are a lot of people that are being drug into something that they don't deserve to be drug into. And the hypocrisy and the fact that the FBI is putting such attention on this case and giving so much detail in it, so many photos and so much media attention, they didn't do half of that for the BLM. And they didn't charge them with half of what they're charging the Capitol rioters with. And frankly, that's racism at its finest. And we have to stop that. And we have to bring America together. We need unity. And we need it the opposite of what this new administration seems to be doing. These executive orders mean absolutely nothing. They're pieces of paper to confuse and to make it look like they're doing something. They are 24 meaningless pieces of paper. If they meant anything, the executive order that Donald Trump put into place to preserve the election would have done something. They mean nothing until the Congress passes some form of legislation that actually revolves around it. So make sure we understand that it's all a sham. It's all an image. Follow the truth. We will continue to bring you that truth, and we will continue to break down just exactly what's going on in this country. We hope you learned a lot today about what's truly happening behind the Capitol rioters and how this is all going to tie around into the impeachment and how it may have even been part of the impeachment all along. Thank you so much for watching Critical Political Thinking. Please like, please subscribe, please rumble, and please ring that notification bell. The algorithms are not sharing our videos clearly, and we need you to help us share the truth. Thanks again for watching. My name's Corey Camasso. God bless America.